Okay. And but before we begin to talk about the book, I actually want to talk about something about you. Um, well, your first name, Kai, is a single syllable name and it's very unusual among Americans, but it's not unfamiliar to Chinese because we had a Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. So I looked it up, and to my pleasant surprise, it's your father's way of paying tribute to his friend, Xu Kaiyu,
Shu
Xu
Kaiyu,
Kaiyu,
yes.
whose Hanyu pinyin name is Xu Kaiyu. So Kai is actually small grass, and therefore triviality, if I may say,
Small,
small grass,
small grass,
mustard grass.
mustard grass.
Yeah,
Right.
small grass, and U is illumination. So from triviality to illumination, it's sort of the kind of job that biographers do, to dig out bits and pieces and weave them together to tell the tales of the world's most celebrated figures. And so I'm wondering, what kind of family influence or early childhood, because you spent your childhood in the Middle East and sometime in India. So I wonder how that influenced you in your choice of becoming a biographer instead of a journalist.
Right. Well, actually, you mentioned Shu Kaiyu, who I'm named after. My father met him at the University of Oregon when he was a young man and just before I was born, and he decided to name me after him. And ironically, Shu Kaiyu later became a professor of Chinese literature, and he became a biographer. He wrote a biography
Yes.
of Chao Enlai.
Yes.
So maybe I was fated to become a biographer, though I don't really believe in fate,
Yeah.
but I believe in accidents. And I became a biographer sort of by accident. But you mentioned that I grew up, and this is true, outside of America in the Middle East and India. My father became a diplomat, a foreign service officer. And so I grew up, my earliest memories are of Jerusalem and Beirut and Saudi Arabia, Cairo, and then India. And I only came back to America really to live when I went to college. And I realized I was a expatriate, a foreigner in my own
You
country.
had to blend in again.
So, I, you know, I didn't understand America, I realized. And so as a young man in my 20s, I sort of drifted into, I liked journalism because, well, I partly wanted to go back to the Middle East and India, the scene of my childhood, and be a foreign correspondent at a time. But then I ended up in New York working for Newsweek and other outlets and The Nation magazine in New York City. And I loved journalism because it was a way to explore this country that I didn't know, that I had not grown up in. And I think it was good training to become a biographer. You know, you learn to interview, you learn to research, and you learn to write and write fast. So,
So I wonder how is it different, a biographer's job, how is it different from a journalist's job? Because, well, obviously, I'm sort of a journalist myself, and you're both telling stories, but biographers is telling probably the life story of a person. And how do you choose what to tell, basically?
yeah, no, there are similarities. And as I said, journalism is good training to become a biographer. And I would argue some of the best biographers in America are actually ex-journalists, like Robert Caro, the great biographer of Lyndon Johnson, and Robert Moses. But it is very different. And it's very arduous research and scholarly writing. It's, I would argue that biography as a genre is the most difficult scholarship. It's the typical biography takes at least 5 years. The research is seemingly endless because, when you delve into the life of another human being, it's complicated and you can never know enough.
You can never know what you don't know.
Yeah, and there are often lacunas of gaps in the knowledge of what you can possibly find out about another person. But, there are records, there are newspaper accounts, there are diaries, letters, interviews, and it's a lot of fun. It's a treasure hunt.
Of course, yes.
And you go into the archives and you go box by box and folder by folder. You have to be extremely patient, and maybe you find something in 6 hours of research. You find one fantastic letter that
And you are euphoric.
So it's very time consuming.
Yeah. But I wanted, you just mentioned you wanted to understand America because as a sort of outsider, you wanted to understand America. How does writing biography of famous people help you to understand America?
Well, I choose subjects that I think I'm curious about, who are powerful, influential men in the 20th century, at the height of the Cold War or the Vietnam era, or in the Middle East, American foreign policy figures who play a role in creating the foreign policy, who explain this larger history. So, my first biography was of John J. McCloy. And McCloy is not very well known even to this day, but he was the sort of referred to informally as the chairman of the American foreign policy establishment, this sort of elite club of policymakers, lawyers, scholars who went in and out of government and advised presidents. And so McCloy had an incredibly fascinating life, where he was Assistant Secretary of War during World War II. Part of his job was to supervise the Manhattan Project, so supervise what Robert Oppenheimer was doing in Los Alamos. But he also interned the Japanese Americans, excuse me, during World War II. He made the decision not to bomb Auschwitz when U.S. intelligence determined that this was indeed a death camp, but he decided that this would be a diversion of military resources away from winning the war, and he couldn't quite believe that it was a death camp as described, in which people were being gassed to death by the thousands and thousands. But anyway, very controversial. After the war, he became president of the World Bank, high commissioner in occupied Germany. In the 50s, he was chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank. He was a close advisor to Dwight Eisenhower, the president. He then worked for John F. Kennedy in his presidency, Lyndon Johnson during the Vietnam War. He was a powerful lawyer in the Middle East, working for American oil companies. He even worked for Ronald Reagan. So it's an incredibly long, decades-long influence.
McCloy, the Bundy brothers, Robert Ames, Oppenheimer in this case, and Roy Cohn. So you've chosen these figures that are lesser known outside the Beltway, the Washington, outside the political circle, but okay, so now I understand. It's a sort of uncovering the power in the shadow.
Yes,
okay,
exactly. And if you read all those books, I would argue.
Okay, so power isn't what you see on the surface. Power is actually from
behind the scenes.
Hey, wow, it's intriguing. Intriguing.
Yeah, and I would argue, if you read my biographies, I'm not saying that you need to, but if you were to read all of these biographies, it would give you an incredible insight into the history of America in the 20th century and how power works in this complicated democracy in the United States.
Right. I definitely will read the one on Roy Cohn because I want to understand Donald Trump.
Well, I have yet to write that one, but
I'm very much looking forward to that.